Good morning, and thank you for joining in with us, or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're at, what time zone you're in, and when you're listening to this. We're just glad you're here. You're glad you're listening in with us. Glad you're tuning in with us. There's a couple of interesting things this morning that you'll find a little different. One, I don't look like I just rolled over out of bed in a t-shirt. I'm actually dressed for work this morning because we're going to do this on the early end today. And since several of you commented on the sound, I've commandeered my son's headset. So hopefully sounds a little bit better this week than it was last week. So I apologize for that.
Is it the first time you've ever had comments about your sound being too low, just in any endeavor in life?
In life, yes. It's the
Yeah,
first time I've ever been told, Mike, we couldn't hear you.
I hesitated to even bring it up. I didn't.
uh, as uh, as we kind of transition in here, we looked at, and then we began this study. We began this idea of trying to understand Christians at work and putting things together from a functional standpoint. So that's what we're going to endeavor to do. We're going to endeavor to try to figure out ways to help you in that work process. So with that in mind, and thinking about both of us having to go to work today, Mr. Ray, how's everything down in Somerset?
Everything's good, my friend. Just kind of by way of introduction, as we discussed, when we last did this study, we kind of laid the groundwork. We hope last time with the thought that God really does care what we do at the workplace, and it's a big part of a lot of our lives, and maintaining our holiness in the workplace is not only necessary but challenging at times. And so we just appreciate everybody who's got interest in doing that. And this is kind of our attempt at tackling it. We're by no means experts. We're just Christians at work, and we understand some of the challenges that come along with that, and kind of our goal to talk through some of those things practically. No question. We're going to have all the passages to back up the principles that we're talking about, and this is not just mine and Mike's idea on how to do it. We're gonna have the Christian, the biblical background, but I think our goal is for the questions that we tackle to be practical, and so that's kind of the reason, Mike. I think that as we look at this organizational chart, if you're on the video with us, we kind of got a generic organizational chart on the screen, and we kind of wanted to tackle this functionally. And I don't think I've ever done that in any Bible study setting. And so we kind of hope that's a unique and worthwhile endeavor, is that there are unique challenges from different roles in an organization. And by kind of deep diving each of these departments individually, it's my hope that we can unearth some interesting questions and actually, maybe talk about some scenarios that somebody, we can think through from a Christian perspective on how to handle different situations and have this be of some benefit to somebody.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. As we get started here, I want to solicit again, if you have specific questions that have come up in the workplace, difficult decisions, hard things that, you've had trouble working through, or maybe not that happened to you, just happened at your organization, and you wonder, I just didn't know what to do there. And maybe here's what I did, but I didn't feel great about it. Send those to us, email them, text them, messages, whatever. Because that's really what we're going to try to do. While, as Michael said, we're not experts in this field by any stretch of the imagination. We're a couple of guys that have, worked our way up the corporate ladder and made a bunch of these decisions. Some of them incorrectly, I'm absolutely sure. And hopefully some of them we got right. What we hope that you get out of this is not necessarily just the answers to the questions, but hopefully the process. How do you go about, when you guys are hit with this, what do you do? And you'll get some of that kind of banner back and forth from us of, all right, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? There's this principle or there's that principle. And that's what we again, when we started this whole podcast, that's all we ever want to do is just invite you all into our crazy conversations, so that you can see how we, back and forth, try our best to tackle this. We want to be servants of God. We want to be pleasing of God. We want to try to do the right thing. And sometimes taking a concept and putting it into a hard reality isn't always as easy as we make it out to be from the pulpit, right? Sometimes it's a little bit more challenging than that. And that's what we hope to be able to guide you through. So with that in mind, Michael, where are we going to fire at them today? Where are we going to start?
Well, we're going to start in the sales department, and this is a place where you certainly have more expertise and time spent than I do. So I think, with your permission, I'm going to take the lead and fire the hard questions at you and give you first crack at them, and then I will correct your answers from there.
Keep score.
Yeah. So I'll just keep score. It'll be fine. The principle that kind of, it may go without saying, but we're going to continue to say it each lesson, is the principle from Colossians 3, and that is, whatever we're doing, we're going to work at with enthusiasm, because we work for the Lord and not for people, because we receive our inheritance from the Lord. And the sister passage to that, that you might remember that we talked about last time, was Ephesians chapter 6. Obey your human masters with fear and trembling and the sincerity of heart, as to Christ, not like those who do the work only when someone is watching, as people pleasers, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. And so that concept that we are doing the will of God from the heart. If I told you that you're doing something that was the will of God and you wanted to do it from your heart, from your soul, it's a very spiritual. I would be talking about something very spiritual, and I am. Paul used that language to talk about what we do on the workplace, in the workplace. And
right.
So,
and remember from our last conversation, from the last podcast, that's everything. So that's not the C-suite. I mean, I think sometimes we take these passages and we say, yes, the C-suite needs to do this. Upper management needs it. No, this is the guy that sweeps the floor. This is your entry level intern that's just there, on an unpaid internship. This is everybody,
yes.
Without exception. It doesn't matter what you do. And it also doesn't matter where you work. If your work is as a stay-at-home mom, and your work is taking care of the kids and doing all those things, that's still work. It doesn't matter if you got a W-2 or not. Whatever your work is, whatever your task is, it's everything.
Yes. And so here, we didn't mention this last time, but the only caveat I say is, no matter what you do, work heartily as to the Lord. And it doesn't matter where your position is. One thing we didn't talk about last time is, and this is going to take a tangent, so I apologize in advance, but in my judgment, it does at some level matter what your business does. It doesn't matter how holy and godly and righteous you want to be as an accountant if you work for a company that produces pornography, right? So there has to be, I think, I've ever heard Christians say, it doesn't matter what the output is, as long as I do my job in a righteous way. And I'll be careful with that. So anyway, with those things as caveats, we're working for the Lord. We're doing it with enthusiasm. And you'll notice on our organizational chart here, it's not just the sales department manager that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about the sales staff and the sales support staff, that whole department. To Mike's point, we're not only talking about leaders here. We're talking about anybody, not just those with authority, but anybody in the department, because all Christians have these responsibilities. And in fact, we're going to try to save a lot of the management discussion for a separate study altogether. So with all that said, Mike, go back to this screen. We'll talk about some specific issues in the sales department. And so as Christians in the workplace, as those who are trying to serve the Lord from our heart, some questions for Christian salespeople. Are you ready?
Tee them up.
Let's do it. Okay. So I guess the first one would be, a stereotype of sales is that the line between sales and honesty, um, as a stereotype, those lines would get blurred. And when you think of sales, the worst of sales, the worst sales experiences that you've had is when somebody hasn't been honest and transparent. And you know so how is there a danger in sales of crossing that line, or being not honest, not transparent? And maybe the underlying question there is, what's the role of the salesperson? What's the role of the sales department? And how do you keep that from lingering into dishonest territory?
All right, so that's interesting. I've spent my whole career on the sales side, and then and into sales management. So this is, of course, this topic, this part of the org chart's near and dear to my heart, from what I've done. But from a corporate standpoint, the corporation will tell you we want honesty and transparency and ethics with every one of our salespeople. That's what they want. Every year we'll have training on this, and you have to sign some kind of disclosure that says absolutely you're going to be honest and transparent in everything that you do, and yada yada yada. So they try to do that, but in the same token, sales, especially commission salespeople,
Yes.
that personality is somebody that's a high risk taker. Because there are months that if you don't sell anything, you don't eat, you don't get paid.
Yes.
So you've got a certain type of a person that's in that role, from a personality standpoint, and there's personality tests that we take. I mean, if we were thinking about bringing you into the sales department, Michael, and we would give you an exam first, this personality exam, and the exam would say you don't belong in the sales department. It says that you've got the accounting side. We would offer you a great role in our accounting department, but sales just not so much. So you've got to kind of balance that too. But here's the thing: the absolute best long-term salespeople are always transparent, do play by the book. The ones that aren't are the short-term ones that wash out. So again, I don't want to pick on any industry, and if you sell cars, I'm not taking a shot at you. However, here's what I want you to think about. The last several times that you've went to a used car lot or a dealer, how many times have you gotten the same person? Americans on average buy a car every 3 to 5 years. And I can tell you that those guys usually aren't there. The same guy's not there selling me a car the next time I go get a car. Whether it's that industry, whether it's turnover, whatever, but that's also who has the worst stereotype, right? Of misleading, of not being honest, and it's those short-term successes. So here's the thing. Here's what I want to step back and say. This is just like our Christian walk and our Christian life. You can take short-term successes, and I'm going to quote successes, and have long-term failures by cheating, by not following the rules. And this is what happens, right? This is why lust is a sin, but marriage is what God wants us to do, right? This is why sexual immorality is a sin. It's because it is a short-term, immediate gratification fix. It's the easy way. Marriage, commitment, long-term relationships, those things are hard. Doing it the right way is hard, but I can take this shortcut into adultery, into sexual immorality, and I can get what I want right now, but I don't have to put in all the hard work to be committed. I don't have to give the proper disclosures. I don't have to do the things necessary for it to be successful long term. And I think it's really the same thing, in sales. If you do it the right way and are transparent, you'll have a very successful long career in sales. If you are dishonest, if you are misleading, if you aren't following, the same biblical principles we do with everything else, honest and fair dealing, if you're not doing that, then you're not going to last very long. You may have a very short run and great success. And I've seen it, you know, in the bank with mortgage lenders. I've seen it with financial advisors. I've seen it with bankers that they come in, they set the world on fire until their deals start to unravel. And 6 months later, a year later, as soon as we find out, they're not here anymore. And that happens in a lot of organizations. It's, you know, yeah, great, you made a bunch of cash, but your career is very short-lived.
Two proverbs that I'd like to insert into the conversation here. One is, and I should have led with this. You know, the proverb writer says, you know, the person that uses dishonest weights and dishonest scales, that's an abomination. And
Mm-hmm.
that is, I think that the 2020 parallel of that would be the person who is not transparent as a salesperson, right? That they're selling
Mm-hmm.
something different than what the buyer gets. And the other one, as you bring up, I think it's interesting. Proverbs 13 verse 11: wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. You know, that's a principle I think would cover any business and any role in business, but specifically in sales, is that you know it's a good life principle, but it is a biblical principle that slow accumulation, that taking the long term approach, trying to keep a customer or a client for 20 years instead of 20 minutes, that kind of fits that Proverbs 13 person. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but he who gathers it little by little will increase it. And so, as you said, as Christians, we're asked to take the long view on a lot of things, in that short term microwave view of whether it's you know our even our position within the workforce, right? That we think that tomorrow we need to be in a position of authority. Now, I think I see this even. Man, I think the first time I've used this phrase, and it's a little scary, is I see younger people coming into the workforce. There is this, now I'm an old guy. As I see younger people coming into the workforce, there is this expectation of promotion on a pace or on a schedule that is often not realistic, or wouldn't have been realistic 10 years ago. And so this idea that it does take time, that it's a process, and the sales process, if done correctly, is kind of that way, right? Is that we're probably going to be better 10 years from now than we are now. Why is that? Well, if you've been transparent with your customers and clients, and you're able to maintain that base, right? That you've been honest, and you know you maintain those, and they accumulate over time, rather than each individual transaction being a one-off thing.
Yeah, and that's really the, you know, the rub here is that, you know, your best people, your best salespeople, and it doesn't mean necessarily you stay at the same company. You know, you can move from corporation A to corporation B. Your stuff's bought and sold all the time, but it's, does that customer base follow you? And that's what's indicative. That's what we look for when we're hiring experienced salespeople is, you know, let's talk about your customer base. You know, how many followers you got? Because if you've been in this business any time, you know, your customer base will tell on you whether you're honest or not. And those, you know, reviews and surveys and things, you know, usually end up telling the full story. I think that Proverbs 13, I think the message puts that get rich quick schemes are an abomination. And I think that's
Hmm.
the way that reads.
Hmm. Hmm. I think that might have been Mike's translation, which is fine. I'm okay with Mike's translation. Okay, second question, and maybe somewhat similar to that, but in a different vein. Is there a danger in your mind of, you know, both Christianity, discipleship, and sales to some degree are about relationships? That as we're out discipling, you know, all the cliches that are true. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care, kind of thing.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That it is not reasonable for us to think that we're going to be fishers of men unless we're out there building relationships with people, and people know that we care and they know about our lives, then they become more likely to uh, understand and believe what we say about our Christianity.
Mhm.
In the same way, sales is based on relationships too, right? Is that you're trying to build a relationship with someone in order to do your job as a salesperson. And so, is there a danger, or do you see a danger? How do you avoid the danger of sales becoming just an exploiting of those relationships? Is that I'm going to take advantage of these people that I have a good relationship with because I know I can sell them stuff and that is good for me financially. Is that a danger? Do you worry about that danger?
Do I worry about it 100%? So that no kidding, it is always a concern of mine. I can talk about, practically some of the things that I do, and I'll do that as part of my answer. But let me kind of answer this in a couple of different ways. Um, One, as if you're really good at what you do and you've got a product or a service that people need, um, I think absolutely you especially try to help brothers and sisters, if you can, as you can. If you're a therapist, whether mental health therapist or physical therapist, and there are people that are hurting in your congregation, that you want to help them. Everything about you screams you want to help them. I'm in the financial planning world, as we've said here several times, and there are a lot of Christians that need that help of, how to allocate 401ks, or how can I retire, or when can I retire, or all of those things that come together. Um, Here's the struggle that I have, is that I think sometimes you can use the church directory as a prospect list as opposed to, building relationships and letting them come to you. So my decision, what I think I do is important, and I think every family needs what I do, without question. If I didn't, I wouldn't be doing it. But my decision is that I don't advertise from the pulpit when I'm preaching. I don't, actively solicit, but through conversations and things, people know what I do, and I let them come to me. I do business with some members at Danville, and I'm their financial planner, but I let all of those relationships come with them asking me for help and not me going and saying, "Hey, I want to be your guy." That's been my decision because I never want it to be, especially professionally, I, I never want the decision to be, I want you to work with me professionally because we go to church together or because we share Christian beliefs. I want you to work with me professionally because professionally I think I'm the best person to work with you. The Christianity part of that is why I think I'm the best person to work from you, but I don't like leading that way. I find it very uncomfortable to lead any conversation with, you should do business with me because I'm a Christian. That feels uncomfortable. It feels like I'm using God to sell, and I don't feel comfortable at all about any of that. It's always giving me the hives, and
Yeah.
it's almost like, it's, this is just terrible cliche, but I'm saying it anyway because you all know that from time to time I'm just an awful person. But it's like the guy that when you're talking to says, "I'm really honest." Like the first thing I want to do is cover my wallet. If you come to me and say that, hey, we should do business together because I'm really honest, I'm a Christian, I preach sometimes. If those are the main reasons we should do business together, I fully believe I'm getting ready to get cheated. I mean, I just do. That's my natural inclination. If it's not really, here's the quality of the work, and when you ask me about the quality of the work, oh, by the way, the quality of the work is good because of Colossians chapter 3, to me, that's a very different conversation.
I've heard it said, thinking back on something you said there, make sure you're being used by God and not using God.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if we're using God to close the deal, I think I ought to have a level of discomfort with that. At the same time, there are going to be people who are naturally drawn to you in your profession, or perhaps another salesperson. I'm maybe more comfortable buying a car from a salesperson that I know shares my beliefs. And
Mm-hmm.
so, how do you integrate that? How do you take on that client that is in truth that is the reason that they're coming to you? Do you have any discomfort with that?
I still do. If the reason you're not coming to me again is because of the quality of the work, I'm going to back up again to Colossians chapter 3. The quality of the work is the reason for the quality of the work is because I belong to Jesus. That's why I do what I do. But I've also seen relationships and the brotherhood ruined because you use a guy that's not good at his job because he's a Christian, and then that deal falls apart. And now you got some animosity in the family. Now you got some animosity in the congregation because really you didn't make the decision the right way. So I do. Now, I also believe that throughout the course of things, and again, it's different based on what you're doing, right? If you're spending, an hour with a car guy trying to buy a car, you may not find out a lot about them. In the financial planning process, I'm spending, weeks with you, months with you, going through and building things. And my face going to come across through some of those conversations as we're getting to know each other. So with me, it comes out in those conversations organically and not inorganically. I'll tell a quick funny story, not to take it too bad of a tangent, but a client of mine that I'd had for a few years, she comes to my office one day and she says, "Mike, I'm mad at you." Like, okay, I'm sorry, what I do wrong? Tell me about this.
Get in line, right?
Yeah. She said, well, she was like, I went looking for your phone number and I Googled you and I came across the, website for the church, and you never told me you were a preacher. She said, I knew you were a Christian and we've had conversations about God. She said, but you're you should have told me you were a preacher. And I said, well, I said, if that comes up organically, it does, but I don't want to lead with that. And I've told every client that when we get to that conversation that, I didn't know you were a preacher, knew you were a Christian, knew you had good values, but, for some reason, preacher's another level, I think, in a lot of people's eyes. Um, to me, I never ever want to be that as part of the sales process. That's why you make that decision. But because here's the thing, sometimes deals go bad. Sometimes, to the best of our ability, deals go bad. I'm a financial planner and I recommend stocks, bonds, mutual funds as part of somebody's overall portfolio. I've picked bad stocks before. I've picked a stock that all the data looked right, the fundamentals looked right. We made the best decision, and that stock went bad. Now, did that stock go bad because the stock went bad? Was it, I had bad advice? Did that person trust me because I'm a preacher or because I'm a Christian more so than they trusted the data? See, all of those things start to get blurred, especially when deals don't go the way that we want them to. So again, you don't want somebody to blame the church, to blame the profession of evangelism, to blame preachers in general for a business deal that, to the best of everybody's ability, doesn't work out the way that we wanted it to.
I want to tease into that just a one step further. As a consumer, I may be looking for someone who shares my values, and I may want my preference may be because, again, I think the deal's going to be transparent. Somebody's going to be honest with me, and we share some of the same core ideas about the quality of work as you said there from Colossians 3. So as a consumer, I may be looking for a salesperson or an organization that has these values to do business with. But at the same time, you as a salesperson don't want to exploit those values to make the sale. And so how are we ever going to, how are we going to interact? So how does the, nature of commerce, right? The buyer and the seller, how is this buyer that is looking for someone that shares their values, and the seller does share their values, but doesn't want to exploit them and market them? How do we ever get these two together? And does that create its own issues?
No, I think they do come together for a couple of reasons. I think one, they come together because we're both praying for the same thing, right? You as a consumer are praying that you find the right person to lead and guide you through a decision, especially if it's a major decision. I, as a sales guy, am praying for opportunities to help people that are looking. So one, we're both praying for the same thing. And two, God puts people together that are praying for that. That's how providence works. And so I think we end up together, but the way that we end up together is not with, Jesus being the bait, right? I'm super uncomfortable with that idea. I think it's in the conversations, it becomes apparent, it comes out organically. you see that, you see the salt and light, quite honestly. As you're dealing with somebody, as you're asking questions, as you're having that experience, you see that salt and light and say, this guy's treating me different than others have. The conversations are different. We get on different lines. That this feels different and it feels distinctive. And I think that comes across in the process. But I think that comes across in the process of everything you're doing as a Christian if you're doing it right.
Different topic. What's the rephrase that? How do you, as a salesperson, avoid? And obviously, what you sell is a little bit unique, but assume you're selling some kind of consumer good. Um, how do you avoid the tie of materialism, consumerism? If you're selling a consumer good, your livelihood depends on people buying this good. Does that feed into consumerism, materialism, or for our friends out there that are salespeople? If I am selling cars, my livelihood depends on people selling cars, on people buying cars. How do I avoid feeding into our worst materialistic instincts?
Well, I think part of it is, I'm going to go back to where we started. Some businesses are bad, right? I mean, if you're, peddling pornography, I don't think you can ever feel good as the pornography salesperson. Like, I don't think that you can get there.
Or
Um,
should?
I, I wouldn't feel comfortable, and this may be open for a broader debate, but I'm not going to feel comfortable as a liquor salesperson. I'm just not. I'm not going to feel comfortable peddling,
For
beer
sure.
or liquor. To me, you're feeding into some really bad spots. So, with those caveats out of the way, with products, to me, also as a salesperson, you've got to believe in what you're selling. So you believe that somebody needs what you have, for whatever reason. And a car is a good thing. Families need cars. People need transportation. Now, part of that, again, sales process, and I think what we want when we go on a car lot is we want an advice-based sale. We want somebody to kind of put their arm around us and say, hey, this is going to be the best vehicle for you and your family's needs. So you have the conversation, you build a relationship, and they tell you, hey, this is really what I think is going to be best for you because I'm on a lot and I see a bunch of different cars or whatever. I think that's what we want. Oftentimes what we get is, whatever's got the biggest margin and how they get the biggest payday. And at least we feel that way.
Yes.
So again, that the Christian salesperson, what stands out, what's distinctive is when they actually are using a consultative based approach where they're, tell me about your family, tell me about what your needs are, tell me what your budget is, tell me about all of those things so that they can get to the point and say, you know what, I know you want vehicle XYZ, but that's going to stretch your budget. And while I got a guy in the back that'll send you to some bank you've never heard of before and get you approved for 150% financing, it's not the right thing for you. You and your family probably should be here, and that's going to be more comfortable for your budget, for what you're trying to do, and for your long-term goals. That's going to sound very, very different, right? If you're sitting at the used car lot and the guy says, I know you want the $30,000 car, but really based on what you've told me, the $20,000 one's really what you should be doing. And while I can get you approved for 30, you don't need that. You need 20 based on your budget, based on your family, and based on all the things that you've told me today.
So
That's going to feel different.
the Christian, based on that conversation, the Christian salesperson sometimes has to say no, right?
Yeah,
That's a unique
100%.
position.
Mm-hmm.
And have you been in that position?
I have. I have. And from from a financial planning part, it's tough. I've had to tell people that, look, you can't invest. And then they look at me like I'm stupid. Well, Mike, don't they pay you here to get people to invest? They do. But, if you don't have any liquidity, if you don't have anything for an emergency fund, I can't in good conscience put your money at risk. But it just doesn't make any sense. If one missed paycheck, you know, puts the house in foreclosure, how can we put money in the market and tie it up for the next 30 or 40 years? We just can't do that. So I've told, I've had to have that conversation with people and say, no, look, you got to kind of stay over here on the sidelines. Let's build up the emergency account. Let's do some budgeting. Let's do all of those things that you're probably 2, 3, 5 years away from needing me. And we'll talk about it down the road. Or if you're on let's, so in my world, if you're on a fixed income, you've got, only fixed dollars you're ever going to make, and your company has a pension as opposed to a 401k, which don't exist a whole lot anymore, there's not a whole lot that you need me for. I can give you friendly advice and guidance. You don't need to pay me for advice and guidance because there's not that much that's going on with you. You're going to work X number of years. When you stop working, you're going to get X percentage of your pay. There's nothing to manage. There's nothing to do. So you don't need to pay me, whatever percentages on a year to give you advice and guidance that you don't need, because everything's kind of taken care of for you. So sometimes you have to have those conversations. And I think, in my case, what I've seen anecdotally is, for those that, I have honest conversations with, other business seems to find me. And again, I chalk it all up to Providence that, for the person that I send out of my office and say, look, I'm really not your guy, I'm not the best fit for you, I'll get a phone call within a few weeks or months of somebody that I'd never talked to that, says, hey, I was referred to you by this person and want to talk to you about doing business. And it's found business. So I think if you do the right thing and you do it God's way, God will find ways to take care of you.
I heard someone say recently that in the modern world, and maybe it's always been true, the modern world just happens to be the one that I live in, so I can talk about it, is in the modern world, just doing what you say you're going to do is a competitive advantage.
Yes.
And that's an interesting way to think about, especially in the sales department, is just doing what you say you're going to do, just following up when you say you're going to follow up, just answering the questions that you said you're going to answer, just providing the information that you said you're going to provide, just doing what you say you're going to do is a competitive advantage. It sets you apart. Well, that's based on Christian principles, right? That's honesty and forthrightness and integrity and all that stuff. And so if you're doing that, again, you're not doing that for a competitive advantage, but if you do that, I genuinely do think that you're setting yourself apart from a lot of what would be your competitors out there in the marketplace.
And that's the thing, we talk about salt and light, and we talk about Christians being distinctive. And it's funny that's one of the things, when I came to the current bank that I'm working for now, one of the things I always do is call through the existing clients that are part of the bank. And, as I called and left messages, people would call back in. And what the amazing thing for me for that first couple of months was people thanking me for calling them back. Like, why would you thank me for that? That doesn't make any sense. Like, that's just it's just polite. I mean, it's how does somebody call you and leave you a message and you don't call them back? But that had been their experience with salespeople that they had worked with in the past, that they call and don't get a response. Which to me is crazy. But to your point, it just following through on, I told you I'd have this pricing by Tuesday. If it's Tuesday, I'm going to call you with the pricing, or I'm at least going to call you and say, hey, we don't have it yet. We got a couple of more pieces we got to figure out, but our next follow-up is Wednesday or Thursday. We have something that I had a sales manager when I very first started in the business always said, his principle was under promise and over deliver. If it takes 4 days to get something to your client, tell them 5, and they're excited when it shows up in 4. Because if you tell them 3 and it gets there in 4, they're mad at you. And he said, so just set the expectations and, under promise and over deliver. And if you'll do that, if you'll take care of them and build in some wiggle room for things that can go wrong, you'll have great relationships. But if you don't do that, if you're not that thoughtful about what they have going on, then you'll ruin relationships over very minor things.
And sometimes I think that doesn't necessarily come from a dark place. It doesn't come from a desire to be dishonest or not transparent, but it's just over optimistic exuberance, right?
Yes.
You want, perhaps you want to provide somebody something and say, no, I think we can do this in 3 days. And then you tell 3 different people that, and the work piles up and it ends up being 6 days from all of them. Well, effectively what you've done is you've misled 3 different people.
Yes.
And so it's incredibly important, especially in this realm. Obviously we have a desire to be honest and transparent, but are we going to functionally be honest and transparent? And then when the second person comes in, no matter how good the deal is, if we've already made an agreement with the first person that we're going to turn it around in 3 days, are you willing to tell the second person that it's going to be a week?
Right.
on a bigger deal that could be
Mm-hmm.
mean more for you. That's where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, cliche.
Mm-hmm.
That are you gonna have the integrity to be, I guess it's just honest,
Yeah.
with ourselves and with our clients, on what the turnaround is.
There's where you hit it, and there's where um, good salespeople, and I'm going to categorize them not just your average salesperson, but really good salespeople, where they falter is not being honest with themselves. And whether it's they've created too much work for the back office, the processing, the operators, and they're not honest with, look, I just loaded them up. There's no way they can take this deal. Or even with themselves, even if they're the ones that have to turn it, not being honest with, look, I've only got so many hours in a day. There's only so much I can do. And there's just no way I'm going to be able to, with the caseload I've got right now, to turn another deal by the end of the week. Because if I prioritize this one, I'm going to have to mess up somebody else's. And so it's being honest with ourselves. I always say, rule number one, know yourself, know what your limitations are, know what you can and can't do. And I'll tell you, that was the hardest thing for me throughout my career, was understanding when I'm not the right guy for somebody. So, being a financial planner is very personal. It's very, you have to be connected. There's a lot of things that have to go right, because my job really is to provide advice to people. I mean, and so if you don't want advice, I'm not the guy for you. But there's been several deals that were, you would think are big deals, multi-million-dollar deals, that I've had to tell people, I'm not your guy. And most of that reason is because they don't want advice. They just want, kind of order taking. And so if I devote time to executing their orders and trying to get their pricing right, then I'm not able to give advice and guidance to my core client group. So it ends up taking away, it ends up distracting, and it ends up, getting away from the core business. And saying no to that is hard, because you're trained when you first get in, take every deal you can get. But the more you grow and the more you understand yourself and your own ethics and responsibilities, the more you understand there's certain things that you just can't take. You just have
Yeah,
to
I
say,
mean,
no, that's not our business.
what's the functional difference between unintentionally giving somebody an incorrect date, and intentionally giving them an incorrect date? Function of that person, there's no difference.
Right.
It was an incorrect, and in their minds, a dishonest assessment of when that could be turned around. So that certainly is a challenge. Completely different track, and we don't have a ton of time left, but want to at least talk about this for a minute. Obviously, part of the sales process is pricing, and so that kind of can lead to its own set of challenges, especially for salespeople, where prices are not are dynamic, that they're not static, they're not set, and the salesperson may in fact have some, in some instances, may have some influence on what the price can be to a given customer. So that can lead to its own set of challenges. So as in the sales department, as a salesperson yourself, how do you handle that issue? How do you determine, if you've been in that scenario, how do you determine which customer gets which price? And then, as a subset of that, maybe we can talk about, as part B of that question, do you answer that question differently if you're dealing with brethren?
So here's the other thing with stereotypes or misnomers about sales, is that the pricing is completely dynamic, right? Because it's not. Every company from the top down has a margin that they're trying to live in. And I don't care what you're selling. If you're selling bottles of Mountain Dew, there's a margin that you have to live in that's built, right? There is cost of goods, cost of service, cost to keep the lights on. So all of that's baked into the margin. Now, typically what salespeople have is a little wiggle room in that margin. So if that target margin that the company puts out is, if you're in a 1% business, which I'm in and Michael's in, we try to live at a 1% margin. That there is some flexibility in there to go, plus or minus, 5, maybe 10 basis points. And what a basis point is, instead of 1, it could go to 0.9 or maybe 1.1. But what you've got to factor in there is, are you picking up any additional cost as well? Right? So if I pick up a a client that's more labor intensive, and I've got to spend, instead of, 6 hours a year, I've got to spend 18 hours a year with them, then that maybe we're looking at 1.1, because we've picked up additional costs. There's additional resources we're going to need to use, all of those things. Transversely, if you've got a client that is less labor intensive, if it's an additive client, so if I'm already dealing with the husband and I pick up the wife's account, additively, I didn't increase the workload any, because I'm seeing them now together as opposed to seeing somebody separate. So there's some pricing fluctuations in there. And not to get too deep into pricing models, but I think that's important, that we've got to understand that these things aren't completely fluid. There's some math behind it, and that everybody, everybody wants to think that, well, 1% I can understand, but and I don't know off the top of my head, but Michael, what's the margin on a bottle of Mountain Dew at a C store? To the end, from the end user,
Yeah.
right? What they're paying up 30% margin on that.
Yeah, let's say that retailer probably in their profit models is probably in a 40% margin, maybe 50% margin on some goods in the store. Some food service goods probably 50, packaged goods probably 35 to 40.
Okay, so let's think about this. That sounds atrocious, right? They're making 40% off of me. Well, they bought that bottle of Mountain Dew for $1, and they're selling to you for $1.40. They made 40 cents on that bottle of Mountain Dew. Okay, we're talking about low dollar items. So they made 40 cents on that. They're probably paying $100 to $150 a square foot for that store. Plus, they're paying employees and benefits and back end and insurance and all that stuff. So while sometimes we jump at percentages and say percentages are horrendous, and they're ripping me off because they had a 40% profit margin, we don't really know. That's not profit margin, by the way. That's sales margin. Profit margin's a whole nother story.
When we get to the accounting part of this lesson series, we're going to talk about the difference between markup and margin and why you're $1.40. But anyway, I'll leave you alone on your 40 cents on your $1.40 for now.
Right. Yeah. So again, there's back into that, and I think sometimes when we look at margins, we think, well, that awful salesperson, he could have gotten away with a 25% margin instead of 40. Well, maybe he could, maybe he couldn't. I mean, we got to look at a lot of things in there, and what flexibility you have and what you don't. So again, that's all part of it. And with Brethren, I think you, like with any other customer, do good to all men, especially those of the household of faith. I think if you've got some wiggle room, if you can, I try to price those very competitively, and and make sure I'm doing everything I can, with also being honest with time commitments, with being honest with the cost, with being honest with the net, because I've also got a fiduciary responsibility to the company. Right? I work for a for-profit company, and I think sometimes the stereotype is that all Christians should work for nonprofits. All Christians should almost take a vow of poverty, and somehow if you work for a nonprofit and you take a vow of poverty, that you're holier than other people. And it's just nonsense, right? Let's be honest with the text. In Acts, what did Paul and Aquila and Priscilla do? They made tents. Well, Paul and Aquila and Priscilla didn't set up a manufacturing facility. They sold those tents, and they went down in the bazaar or the open place market, and they sold their wares. That's how they made a living. They made a living by selling tents, and they made a living based on whatever margin that they could get, because that was their only means of support. And so, sales or making and selling of products, and having a comfortable enough margin to where you can afford to take care of your family is absolutely a biblical concept. I mean, you can see Paul doing that for sure throughout Acts, and Aquila and Priscilla, and Paul would always fall back on that. It was like, he could, if the gospel was supporting him for a while, that was great. But if not, he could always make tents, and again, making them to sell. So those profit margins, and I'm sure that as Paul, dealt with people, he had to get a fair enough price to where, if it cost him $1 to make a tent, and he had to sell it for $2, but it cost him, 90 cents to live in town off of every tent, then that's all part of the math that goes into that as to what the true net profit is. But there's nothing wrong with being profitable. There's nothing wrong with making money. There's nothing wrong with owing a fiduciary responsibility to the company that you work for, because they're for-profit companies. They got to make money. They've got employees to pay, and all the way down that list, right? So the money that I make as the sales guy has to pay the support people. And that has to also cover the overhead of the building and the lights and the insurance and all that stuff. All of those things have to be covered by that. So the margins are all part of making sure that you stay employed and you keep everybody else employed too.
I would add Lydia to that list of your sellers in the Book of Acts. She was a salesperson. She was a saleswoman. She was a seller of purple. So there had to be some margin in that in order for her to survive.
And luxury goods, by the way.
Yeah, well said. There, as you said, there's this tension that exists in this part of the conversation, that there is this sense that if there's any profit being made, then someone is being exploited. That there's that, at least that sentiment exists in some places, even among brethren, right? In that there's just this feeling that if company X is making a profit, then they're charging more than they have to. So this kind of this gets outside of the sales realm a little bit, but is there a point when profit does become exorbitant or exploitative, and how do you make sure that you're not getting to that point?
So I mean those are tough philosophical questions, really. In core belief, I'm a capitalist, and I think the market always dictates what's there. But again, I don't think any of us, and I don't think Scripture says that we've got to take a vow of poverty. Peter was very wealthy. He was successful in what he did. Does that mean he had too much profit? No. But what'd you do with that profit? What'd you do with that? I think that's the bigger question. That it's not, is it a sin to make money? I don't think I can see that anywhere, whether we're talking about Abraham, whether we're talking about Solomon, whether we're talking about Peter, whether we're talking about any of these wealthy guys, Joseph of Arimathea, any of these very wealthy people that we can point out in Scripture. Them being wealthy, them accumulating wealth was never an issue. The issue is what you do with it. Are you generous? Are you taking that and doing, are you doing good work with it? Or are you like the rich young ruler? Are you relying on that wealth? Is that your God? So, again, God's going to bless us. And there's, especially with some of this, and I think part of it, you get into some of these companies that go parabolic. If me and you were smart and worked in our garage and built a computer system that revolutionized the world, and added, hundreds of billions of dollars or potentially trillions of dollars to the economy, is it wrong that, 10% of that, because we created the technology, we should have? I don't think so. That when you create a disruptive technology like that, when you are the inventor and the owner, you should have a pretty sizable piece of that. But again, you're working for God, not for shareholders, not for board of directors. You're working for God. So what are you doing with that? I think that's the bigger picture. And that's what we tried to answer in our last series of being, what the things that God's entrusted us with, what are you doing with them? So I don't think it's wrong to make profit, to make margin. I think could potentially be wrong depending on what you're doing with it.
There's much more to discuss in this area, and I'm sure we'll dabble in the sales department as we move on to future lessons. But speaking of responsibilities, I have some, and so I have to end this at this point. I thought that was a very cool dive there. Maybe we'll touch on some other sales topics in future lessons. But I know maybe next time, I don't know if it's operations or accounting, but we'll determine which direction to go next, and we'll try to do this again this time next week.
Yeah, and a little bit of feedback too. We've thrown out the idea here this morning of maybe having some guest speakers. So if you are in HR, if you're in management, if you're in one of these roles that we're going to go down, and you are okay with being peppered like I was this morning, then shoot us a note, text us, or message us or whatever, because I think we may invite you in and get some expertise in some places that, quite honestly, Michael and I just don't have expertise. We've never worked in the HR department. He's an accountant. I'm a sales guy. So there's parts of the business that we know about but don't have direct experience in. So we may love to invite some guests on here in the future, but we'll see if we have any takers.
Very good, my friend. Until next time.
All right. Thank you all for tuning in, and look forward to seeing you again next week.
Thank you, brother.